Well met, adventurers! Combat is a fun and sometimes essential part of the game whereby it allows your players' characters to be able to show off their prowess in combat and be able to show how better they've been getting through the levels up, because obviously it's been helping them gain new abilities and such, and combat tends to be one of the best ways to show that progression. So in today's video I'm going to be throwing a few tips and tricks your way, of which I wish that I knew when I first started out as a DM. So this is kind of for new DMs, but also old DMs might be able to find something useful that you don't maybe use to be able to help, because sometimes combat can take a little bit of time, so this is to help a little bit streamline the process. So let's get into it. So yes, it is I, Nathaniel Gomezian, shopkeeper and proprietor of Gaming Treasure Chest. And as I said, today's video, I'm going to be focusing in on some tips and tricks that you can use in combat to help streamline it a little bit and be able to make it so that it's not such a long slog fest. Like, I guess sometimes combats can take a long time with people deciding what they want to do, rolling all the dice and whatnot in between. It can sometimes take you out of the action that is currently happening. So I'm going to give you a few tips that, as I said, I didn't know when I first started DMing, and it's things I picked up along the way that hopefully I can give to you, if you've never heard these things before, that be able to help you out. So as I said, this is primarily for new DMs and players, but you might be able to find something if you're an old player or DM that might be able to help you along the way. So let's get into these. Now this first tip might sound really obvious to some people, but when I first started DMing, I didn't think to do this, and it is simply to pre-roll your initiatives. If you've got a lot of enemies that your players are going to be coming up against in a single combat, there's nothing wrong with pre-rolling to know what all the initiatives are of all those monsters before going in, rather than as combat starts and you ask your players to roll initiative, having to roll initiative for each of the monsters that they are currently facing. And sometimes, I said, that could take time, especially when you're having to add all the adds and minuses to all the rolls to work out where they are in the initiative order. There's nothing wrong with pre-rolling all of those things, finding out all the initiatives and writing it down on a piece of paper, so you can be like, right, that's where all the enemies are. Now all I need is my players to roll initiative, and then you fit them in between all the ones that you've pre-rolled. And so it just makes that first bit of combat a lot quicker and streamlined than, as I said, rolling for all the monsters as combat starts. So I said, it's a nice simple tip, but it will cut down a lot of time. The second tip I have for you is a website that is magnificent, a great tool to use as a combat tracker. Is simply D&D Combat Tracker. It is linked down below as well, as obviously I'll be showing it to you in front of you at this moment in time. It is magnificent. It doesn't cost anything. They are not sponsoring this. This is just something which I use that is a magnificent tool, because you can search up a monster on it and it will auto fill in some of the details for you in terms of what their AC are, what their rough HP is. Now obviously you can edit these things and whatnot. Obviously you can edit to actually add in the initiative so that it will place it into the initiative order as you want. It's also magnificent because if you've got loads of the same enemies, you can just look it up, add the quantity, and it will automatically number all of the different zombie 1, zombie 2, zombie 3 kind of things for you, so you can keep track of that. As well as when it comes to when your players are doing damage to each of these things, you can simply just type in the damage and it will automatically remove it for you. And you can also add on conditions and whatnot, if they become grappled, poisoned, whatever. And so this is a magnificent tool that can help you keep track of all the different things which are going on in combat, and I would highly recommend this. It is also magnificent because it actually can link you directly to that monster, so you can actually read up on them as well during combat. You can also add your own monsters onto this as well, so all around it is just an amazing tracker. And I said, when I found it for myself, it was okay, right, this takes away a lot of my job in combat, having to keep track of these different things. So it was a godsend, and so I'm handing it to you as well. The next tip I have for you is that if you've got a lot of different enemies or monsters or whatever that are attacking your party, there's nothing wrong with simply just using the average damage. And what I mean by that is, if you don't know, if you look on your monster manual, where you look up a monster, it does actually give you what the roll is to do a damage, but before that there's a number, and what that number is the average damage that kind of thing would do. And so it's a quick reference, and the reason why they put it into the monster manual is so that when that thing does damage, you can simply say, okay, right, that does that many damage to you. And there's nothing wrong with using it. You don't have to roll for each individual damage. You're already rolling for their attack. And so this just streamlines it, that you can be okay, right, it hits, it's going to be doing this much damage without you having to re-roll and then having to do the mathematics of finding that out. I would still say that when it comes to your big bad or big enemies, or if somebody's casting a spell, then still do the damage in terms of rolling it, because if it's your big bad, it's almost like your playable character, and like you want to see like how much damage they're legitimately doing, so there's nothing wrong with rolling for that. But things like, I said, little things like zombies and such, there's nothing wrong with each time that they hit, they're just doing 4 damage. Some DMs don't like this because it can sometimes allow your players to metagame. If they know that every single time a zombie's hitting, it's doing 4 damage, it means that they can decide that like, okay, right, if I try to get away from this enemy, like to kind of like move away from it, it's going to provoke an attack opportunity, but I'm only going to be taking 4 damage, and I can take that so that I can move further away to do whatever I'm trying to do. So it allows that kind of like metagaminess, but also to me, that means that that's my players thinking tactically, and that's them like having fun, like thinking like that. So to me, that doesn't actually ruin things in my opinion, but I know that there are some DMs that think, oh, well, if they know they're only going to take this much damage, then like it ruins the fun kind of thing. So I can kind of see both sides, but I don't mind doing that, is what my point is. But I said, that's up to you. But I said, it's just a quick way of streamlining it, just knowing like, okay, right, that's going to do that much damage. And obviously you can tweak that damage depending on what like the level of your party is, how many members they are. You can either put that damage up or put that damage down for whatever you see in the book. Like you can decide like, what you want to do with that. But I said, they put it in the book for a reason so that you can like quickly reference that. I'm only really mentioning this as a tip because when I first started dungeon mastering, I didn't actually know what that number was. It was only when a friend of mine who has been DMing for a long time explained to me, oh, that's the average of what the damage is, and he said that he would sometimes use that just to speed things up. I was like, oh yeah, that's right. That does help a lot. But I think I would include this just in case there are people who don't know what that number means like I didn't, and like I can just help you along. Anyway, on to the next one. The next tip is yet again a very simple one, but there are a number of different people who don't use it, and it's very simple to help out make things go a little bit faster, and that is by letting your players know who is next. If you're playing on something like Roll20 where everyone can see the initiative order in front of them, or if you've got an initiative tracker whereby you're moving it with like a piece of paper with people's names on it, this could be a lot more easier. I know there are some people who don't show an initiative tracker and just like, basically the DM writes it down and goes, okay, right, you're next, you're next, you're next. And sometimes there are players who will write down the initiative order for themselves, but as the DM, there's nothing wrong with, as you're going through the initiative order, being, okay, right, it's your turn. Oh, by the way, you're next, so be thinking about what you're going to be doing on your turn. You can say this to your players at the start of the campaign or in session 0, just be like, okay, right, I'm going to let you know who is next so that you can start planning your moves, just so that when you turn to that player and go, okay, right, it's your turn now, they don't go, oh, okay, right, let me just quickly just like work out where everything is and try and work out what my plan is, which can sometimes happen with players and has happened with me in the past when I've been like, all right, it's your turn, and sometimes players take a long time to be like, to focus in on what's going on and to decide what they want to do. Now, this is going to come down from player to player, because sometimes there are players who are just like, sometimes get distracted or look at their phones or whatnot and are not engaged. Now, admittedly, that's something else which you've got to try and make them want to be engaged. But as I said, sometimes just prompting them, letting them know, okay, right, your turn is next, just gets their mindset into, okay, right, let me look at the battlefield and let me decide what I'm going to do. So when it hits their turn, they know, all right, this is what I'm going to do. I will say that from a player point, I do know that sometimes this can drastically change. I do know that when I was a player, I would always know, okay, right, my turn's next, but in the turn that's in front of mine, something happens which completely changes the battlefield so that it is something completely different than what I was expecting when it comes to my turn. And so I had an idea, but now things have massively changed. So sometimes telling them, yeah, again, maybe in the first session or in session 0, to sometimes decide on what your plan's going to be, but maybe have a backup plan as to what your character might do as well, can get them thinking that little bit more. As I said, you don't have to add that in, but I do know that as a player, that does sometimes happen where you do decide what you want to do, but when it comes to your turn, everything changes. But having that backup plan, then, okay, right, if I can't do this, I'm going to do this, kind of also help make the turn go faster rather than, as I said, it hitting your turn and being, okay, right, that's there, okay, what am I going to do? So yeah, again, a simple tip, but it can streamline and make things go a little bit faster. I'm not in favour of these people who say oh, put a timer, like a sand timer on, this is your turn and you've got to take it within this, because sometimes especially when it's magic users and whatnot, who actually do have to take a little bit of time to decide where they're going to put maybe a spell. If there's a range and whatnot, can sometimes take a lot more time than say a fighter who's just going in there and going bosh bosh. So I'm not in favour of putting timers down. I know there are some people who say to put those down, but personally, I think that actually ruins the fun, especially in combat where sometimes the strategic element of it can be where the fun is. So just getting your players to think about what they're going to be doing, knowing that their turn is next, I think is a nicer way of doing it. But that's what I think. Anyway, on to the next one. So the last combat tip that I have for you is simply, not every combat has to be a challenge. And what I mean by this is that when I first started out as a dungeon master, I thought that every single time when I was throwing combat at my players, like, I had to make it as challenging as possible, because they've got to earn these victories. But that's not necessarily true. Sometimes just throwing combats at your players in terms of a pack of wolves, or maybe a pack of bandits who have never come across your players before, but think, oh, there's some people here that we're going to be able to steal some gold from, not realizing just how powered up that they are, can be a lot of fun in terms of the fact that it actually gets your players to understand how powerful their characters are becoming, in terms of they can just do a combat and dispatch the enemies very quickly. That can actually be very fun for your players, because let's face it, they want to be the heroes of this story, so allow them to be the heroes of this story by sometimes not throwing in combats that are going to be completely massively challenging, that oh right, yeah, I want them to struggle all the way through and for them to barely get through this alive. You can throw those combats at your players, and that can be very rewarding for them as well, but not every single combat. As I say, when I first started out, I would be like, okay, crap, I've got to make it so that this combat's got to be more challenging than the last combat, But as I said, yet again, you don't have to worry about doing that. Obviously, you want your big bad combat to be challenging. You want them to have troubles and adversity along the way. But as I said, not every combat has to be so. Because one fun thing that you can do, playing off of this, is that you can have your players run into a band of mercenaries, or a couple of goblins or whatever, and in the first combat it be quite a struggle in that, because they could be quite low level at the time, or even they could be defeated, if we say, but it's a band of brigands who basically mug them but still keep them alive, kind of thing, and then, or a band of goblins that they just barely managed to defeat, and then later on in the campaign, when they level up and are quite powerful, throwing that enemy at them again, being raided by a couple of goblins, or it being the same group of brigands or whatnot that attacked them in the past, having them just go through and beat the crap out of all of them without blinking, it allows your players to be able to understand just how powerful their characters are becoming, and what was a challenge is nothing to them now. And so that is a reward within itself for your players to be able to discover. So it's very important to be able to sometimes do things like that. But that's just some tips and tricks that, as I said, when I started being a DM, that I didn't know about. So I hope that they help you out if you're a new DM, and these things can help streamline your combats. But I would love to hear if you've got any ideas and things that you do in your games to help make combats flow a little bit faster or a bit more fun and such. Please let me know down in the comment section down below what you do, because I'm sure people watching this will love to go down to the comments and see other ways that other DMs and such using their games to be able to help with combats and whatnot. Who knows, I might learn something as well. I might make another video in the future using your ideas. So please feel free to leave it down in the comments down below, as well as if you enjoyed yourself and want to see more D&D content and such, then why not consider hitting the subscribe button if you enjoyed this video. I make many more like it, so please, if you want to come along on this adventure with this man who's trying to make a dream come true, then please feel free to. As well as there is the Discord server, whereby I'm hoping to build it into a lovely community where we can share ideas, quests, whatever. So if you want to join that, please feel free to. As well as if you want to help support the channel financially, then why not consider checking out the Etsy store of Gaming Treasure Chest, where there's a bunch of a D&D themed items, be they dice rollers, dice holders and such, that I have designed myself and will 3D print and send to you. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and honestly, thank you so much to everyone who has watched in 2024. It has made this year amazing, with you guys watching and commenting on my videos. It has really meant a lot to me. So thank you so much. Until next time, goodbye.